Narcissism is about a real societal danger associated with a personality pattern that society is more often than not likely to enable. We make narcissistic people our leaders, our heroes, and we view their lives as aspirational. We are, in essence, revering the very patterns associated with personalities that make the world a more dangerous place.
You got to remember, when we really talk about frank paranoia, we really could be talking about a more severe mental illness, when somebody really does believe that someone's out to get them, or someone's reading their thoughts, or something more sinister than that. When we're using the word here, it tends to be more of an extreme suspiciousness. Narcissists, as a rule, tend to be extremely suspicious. And there could be a few reasons for that. Some of it goes back to this issue of hypersensitivity, something we're going to talk about. But in many ways, I think that they know the menace that they represent. And I sometimes wonder if they don't just project their menace into the world, and they assume that other people have equally bad, or what we call malevolent, motives to them. They're out to get people, so why wouldn't they think people are out to get them? I just think that they can see how bad things can get because they know what they're willing to do to reach a goal or get exactly what it is that they want. When we talk about this sense of sort of extreme suspiciousness, or like I said, sort of a paranoid kind of a style in narcissism, it can manifest in lots of interesting ways. I have talked with many people who are in a relationship with a narcissist, and they'll say, it is amazing how much my boyfriend or my husband is almost like a stalker. Like they monitor my every move. And when we talk about this idea of being controlling, we'll get more to that. But it's this idea that they want to know your whereabouts all the time, largely because they think you're doing something. They think you might be cheating on them, or you think you might be up to something that they don't want you to. It's largely around infidelity. So there is almost like this paranoia that people are sort of out to get them in that way. In addition, I think that they've done sort of enough sort of nasty stuff that it's actually not surprising that some people may want to be out to get them. And so they may have actually left enough damage in their wake that it's quite possible that there are people out there who do want to get them, as it were, and maybe looking for revenge or at least payback on things that have gone wrong. In that way, narcissists may be more likely to sort of be looking over their shoulder. They also have this tendency to believe that people are very envious of them and that people are sort of want what they have. And so they're often like that, kind of like Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, and they're like, my precious. They're very much about, this is my stuff, I don't want to share it, and other people are out to get me and get it from me. And so there is this chronic sense of sort of being put upon that can quite often look like paranoia. It is that almost combination of characteristics that make a narcissist, their lack of empathy, their grandiosity, their inability to sort of accurately read people, their hypersensitivity. All of this sort of bundles up and really generates a narcissist to be almost more paranoid than a normal person would be. If you have business dealings with somebody who's narcissistic, it's quite likely that they'll have you sign like 72 NDAs and this contract and that contract and this protection and that protection. And a lot of it almost feels like overdone. Again, it comes back to the sense of, well, if you're in a business deal with me, you're probably going to take advantage of me. Again, of course they think that because they're probably going to do it to you. You know, no one knows a thief better than a thief. So it's many times that they know all the angles somebody's going to run because they're going to run them themselves. But if that's not the kind of person you are, the way a narcissist's mind works, it may very much feel like a sort of like paranoid, like, why do you think everyone's out to get you? It is because of sort of, it's almost like a perceptual error. They really do think that people focus on them more than they actually do. And as a result, they assume that other people covet the things they have and the things they want. Going into business with a narcissist because of this paranoia can be a really tough venture. Because in some ways it's like you signed your entire life away. They often take a lot less risk than you. And more often than not, these deals never end up in a good place. If the whole venture succeeds, odds are the narcissist is going to run off with more than the lion's share. And if the whole venture goes down, odds are you're going to be carrying more of the damage. The narcissist paranoia, again, is not on the level of a person who's psychotic, who truly believes that, for example, Martians are monitoring their thoughts, or that there are somebody lurking out the door out to get them. It's something that's more soft around the edges and probably could be called a sort of a really heightened suspiciousness. Either way, whether this is your partner or a family member or certainly a colleague, it can make for a world that's probably a little bit too suspicious for you to really want to live in. This is honestly what I would consider to be the defining characteristic of narcissism. That means understanding what exactly is empathy. Empathy is the attempt or desire to understand the experience, typically the emotional experience of another person. And often then that is accompanied with a behavior to address that or to meet that empathic recognition. So for example, that might be offering a soothing word, doing something to support someone, or just helping them out. But at the core of it, it is attempting to understand the experience of another person. That means that you have an inherent interest in or curiosity about the other people around you, and most importantly, it means that you care. It doesn't necessarily mean, however, that you've had the same experience as them. The best example I can give of that is, let's say you don't have a child, but someone near you does, and that child is going through something difficult, so that your friend, their parent, is having a hard time. You don't have to have a child to understand that somebody who has a kid that's going through a tough time may need your support or soothing words or just a hug. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your experience. Empathy is that drive to even try to understand experiences that aren't your own. So now let's take this trait, this quality, lack of empathy, and sort of think about how it manifests in narcissistic personality styles. Where I often see this play out is that a person who is with a narcissist, so let's say a person is in a relationship with somebody narcissistic, and they listen day in and day out to their narcissistic partner, complaining about their job, complaining about the people at work, complaining about how they're not appreciated and they're under-regarded and no one knows how great they are at work and woe is me and all of that. And then one day you actually share about a tough day you're having and they barely look up from their phone and like, huh, what do you want me to do about this? I can't change this. I can't do anything about this. And you're like, what? Like, I've been listening to your stuff for 5 years, and one day I'm asking you to listen to one important thing, and you can't even come up with faking interest? That's what lack of empathy can look like. It can go much deeper than that. You could be going through a tough time, and they won't even stop to recognize that maybe you just need a little more help around the house, or you just need a shoulder to cry on, or you just need someone to get it and look you in the eye and try to understand how you're suffering. That absence of empathy is one of the most destabilizing characteristics of being with a narcissist. Now imagine you're the adult child or the child, the young child of a narcissistic parent. Their lack of empathy may mean that when you're suffering or struggling, they don't even stop to take notice, or they only do so when it's convenient for them. That can be devastating not only for a child, but also an adult child of a parent who feels like their parent doesn't care. And that right there is the core of the empathic deficit we see in narcissism. They really don't care. Sometimes people will say, it's interesting you say this, I'm with a narcissistic person, and sometimes it feels like they care. Sometimes they do. Because what narcissists do, in a way, they sort of weaponize empathy. They use it only for their gain. So let's say they need something from you. Then they actually may pay laser sharp attention to what you're about, how you're feeling, and what you're up to. So they can really say, oh my gosh, it sounds like you're going through such a tough time. And it's all a manipulation. It's all a sense of sort of putting this empathy on you or giving you the sense of being empathically regarded so that then you may actually give them money that they hope for, or give them time, or whatever else it is that they need from you. So they may use empathy more as a tool rather than it being an authentic expression or authentic desire to connect with you. And as many of you know, when we're talking about narcissism in the early phase of a relationship, we're talking about love bombing. Somebody who comes and lavishes you with attention and gifts and all of it. In those early phases, it can often feel like you're with the most empathic person in the world. They come to work, they pick you up, they offer to help you sort of get new things for your home. They offer to help you with other things you need to do. You're like, wow, this person totally gets me. Remember, they can turn the empathy on and off. It's not like they're incapable of it. They've got it in there, but by and large, they can't be bothered to use it because remember, they don't care. Over time, living with a narcissist, because of their lack of empathy, it can feel like you live in a house that has mirrors in it, but you never see your own reflection in them. Like I said, it's confusing, it's destabilizing. You often don't know where to turn to get your feelings met because you think you should be able to get that from the significant people in your life. But if they lack empathy, good luck with that. People wonder, is there anything I can do about this? Can I create more empathy in this person? Probably not. Empathy tends to be something that comes naturally. The sort of booby prize in all of this is something we call cognitive empathy. It's kind of empathy light. It's this idea that I get why you feel that way. Like, for example, let's say your partner cheats on you and you say, my God, you've devastated me. My heart's broken. You've betrayed me. And your partner sort of looks at me and says, yeah, I get why you feel that way. Not so useful. Doesn't make you feel good. So it's sort of like this sort of intellectual exercise in empathy, but it's not the real thing. Real empathy is accompanied by real emotion. It could be tears. It could be touch. It just could be gentle murmurs of reassurance. So they can produce it. They can use it as a tool. Sometimes they can even use it as a weapon. But one thing they can't really do is have it as the real deal. Lack of empathy is probably one of the most soul-sapping qualities in narcissism. If it's happening to you, you probably know it. Is it amenable to change? Not really. In many ways, a narcissist is made of Teflon. Like, they are able to deflect blame and responsibility for so many things. We sometimes see this in very public cases. A big corporate wonk or celebrity who's quite narcissistic does something bad, and until the 11th hour, they dodge, they duck, they deflect, and they definitely don't take responsibility until they're really cornered with a smoking gun. And then they'll make some sorts of half-hearted efforts to take some responsibility, but then they'll often say that classical narcissistic defense. Instead of saying, I'm so sorry for what I've done and for the people I've hurt, they'll say, I'm sorry that they feel that way. That's not taking responsibility, is it? So that experience, whether it happens on an international level because of a scandal, or it's happening in your own life, is incredibly invalidating. And in fact, it can be quite dehumanizing that a person is simply not doing the adult thing and taking responsibility for something that's happening in their lives. We all screw up. We all screw up. And the most noble thing we can do is step up and say, I did this and I'm responsible for this. And take the hits on that and move forward. At a minimum, it's good karma. But we live in a very litigious society where attorneys on a regular basis are instructing their client, don't cop to this yet. Let me see what I can do. So when the system is set up, we're taking responsibility for something that in fact you did do wrong or did do. To not take responsibility is incentivized. You can see how a narcissist will run with that. In fact, a lot of people will think that a person who does take responsibility is a bit of a sucker for doing that and taking a harder hit than they need to. When we don't take responsibility in a close relationship for something we did or said or didn't do or didn't say, it is very hurtful to the other person or people in those relationships. Sometimes simply taking responsibility is all that another person needs. It goes farther than an apology. For a person to say, I did do that. I don't even have a good explanation for why I did, but I did. And if they throw in an I'm sorry and mean it, well then you're getting more than what most people would ever get with a narcissist. But that ability to take responsibility is very difficult because shame is such a key dynamic in narcissism. Shame is sort of a public emotion where the public disapproves, and what that means is if there's shame in the house, The narcissist is afraid that they may not get their validation and admiration that they typically need. So when they don't take responsibility, they're able to dodge that shame bullet for at least for as long as they can. And some people never take responsibility for a lifetime. It ends up becoming at best a deathbed confession, which is very dissatisfying and in fact quite meaningless for the person who receives it. If you're in a relationship with somebody who chronically doesn't take responsibility for the things they do or don't do, pay attention to that, because over a lifetime, that ends up taking a toll on your soul. In a family system, when people don't take responsibility, it can be really destabilizing. It erodes a sense of trust within that family, and people start becoming very defensive or just simply pulling away from the system because nobody is taking responsibility for what's happening. It's a terrible lesson for children to see, because probably one of the most noble things we can show a child is, even if you do something wrong, step up, do the right thing, and take responsibility for it. In many situations, children often are taught like that's really all we want from them as adults is to take ownership, that it's a terrifying thing to do. But once they do it, not only can it help them prevent them from engaging these behaviors in the future, but it also teaches them to be a grown-up when the time comes and actually take responsibility for their actions. We're living in a world where more and more people are doing bad things and hoping they can deny them after the fact and get away with it, rather than really doing the humane thing and taking ownership for them. That kind of culture not only plays out on global, national kinds of stages, or even within a company or a school or a family, but where it really breaks our heart is when it happens one-on-one with the people we allegedly love and who are supposed to love us, who just simply cannot take responsibility for what they've done or said. Again, pay attention to the pattern. When it happens, your best recourse is to reflect on what this means and what this person is about. That pattern of deflecting and not taking responsibility tends to be pretty chronic, and it's not particularly amenable to change. You can certainly try, and sometimes people can find through therapy, they can encourage a partner to be able to say, yeah, I did do that. But sometimes after a lifetime or years of hearing that, they finally do start taking responsibility. It may be too little, too late. One of the harder dynamics for people to get their head around about narcissistic people is how much they really do view other people, really in essence as objects or as conveniences, which means that when that object of convenience is not behaving the way you want it to do, it becomes an inconvenience. But it goes a step beyond that, because when they take advantage of other people, it's really that they determine something that this person can bring to them. It can be money, it could be connections, it could be experiences, it could be that they're very attractive and will make them look good to the world. Whatever it is, they will sort of exploit that relationship for what it's worth and get what they can for it. What it can make you feel is kind of gross, as though you're not being seen as a person, but rather as an opportunity to leverage future opportunities. That idea of being taken advantage of is not a dynamic that's just restricted to interpersonal relationships. You can see it in close intimate relationships. You catch it in friends, you can catch it in the workplace, you can even catch it in family experiences, where you'll see that one family member, let's say one family member succeeds, that a narcissistic member of that family will attempt to take advantage of that person's sort of standing, experience, whatever, for their own advantage. In the most extreme of this, we'll sometimes see this when a family member maybe makes it big, becomes rich or famous or something like that, and another family member didn't fare as well, and that other family member is narcissistic. They may really try to go along for the ride, almost be a hanger-on, or in the worst example, even cash in on them, turning in uncomfortable facts, uncomfortable family history, or really just sort of dropping a dime on them. There have been recent celebrity scandals where a family member actually was the person, it sounded like a very narcissistic family member, was the person who threw someone else in that family under the bus on the basis of that other family member's notoriety or something like that. So it can be really awful to see it play out in a family dynamic sort of setting. It can also feel horrifying if this is why somebody may be pursuing you. Now, all of us are sitting and saying, well, I ain't all that. What's there really to take advantage of? It's all relative. You may hold a higher position someplace than someone. In the grand scheme of things, you may have access to something they don't have. I don't know. a beach house, a better car, reservations someplace, tickets to a basketball game or something like that, that in wanting that thing or that experience from you, that they may actually then try to take advantage of that person to make that experience. There was actually a really interesting story, news story that came out that was sort of just went on trial around the time we're making these videos. It involved a woman who was like a real sort of a grifter. She would take advantage of people. She sort of put herself out in the world as though she was some sort of like Russian billionaire's daughter, and had this whole mysterious backstory. And in essence, what she was doing was she was becoming friends with people and exploiting these connections that she claimed to have to get them to pay for stuff that ended up culminating in her becoming friends with a woman who ended up fronting up something like $60,000 for nights out and a big vacation and all of that. And interestingly, that case went to trial. The woman was found guilty, but even throughout the trial, this woman was making a big show of wearing specific kinds of outfits and sort of trying to still look dazzling in the courtroom, as it were. So that's a real example of somebody who was taking advantage of people by telling a story about themselves, twisting the reality so they could get what they want from another person who didn't even have it to give. You see this in corporate settings all the time. When somebody walks into a situation, or business settings, and they see that there's a weakness they can exploit, and they take advantage of it. This happened on massive levels, if you want to argue it that way, in the mortgage banking crash that led to the recession of 2008, where a handful of people took advantage of a system and exploited it, and ended up really taking advantage of the naivete of borrowers. So taking advantage of a weakness or a person for your own gain is something that can happen at a massive level, at the global economic level, or at an individual level. But what narcissists, particularly malignant narcissists, and obviously psychopaths, are really good at doing is finding out a person's weakness, or recognizing that somebody has what they want, and exploiting any weakness in that situation to get what they want out of that situation for their own gain. When you've been through that on the receiving end, it's horrible. You feel very victimized. It can feel quite traumatic, and in some cases, it can actually be quite tragic. You may lose a lot of money. You may lose reputation. You may lose status, and there may not even be a way to get legal reparations. For example, you may never get that money back. So being taken advantage of in that way doesn't feel good, whether it's an intimate partner, a business associate, a family member. It almost always feels exploitative, and it can even feel traumatic. If you're going through it, sometimes the best you can do is try to get the best reparation you can in this kind of a situation, and sometimes you can't, so you really have to go to a place of radical acceptance and say, okay, shame on me. Hopefully next time I learn. But after those experiences, it can be really, really hard to learn to trust after someone takes advantage of you in such an extreme way. It's a signature calling card of a narcissist to take advantage of other people and take advantage of weaknesses in a system. Hopefully by watching this, you'll be a little more likely to steer clear of that. For a person to be controlling, this is exactly what it sounds like. They try to control all aspects of another person's life. And most specifically, we see this in terms of comings and goings, the schedules they maintain, accountability, how they expect that other person to dress or look. So it can really take in a lot of territory. To be controlling is also a key dynamic of something we see in domestic violence. That idea of control is frequently something we see in those kinds of really pronounced and dark patterns. But even in a way that doesn't escalate to the level of full-blown domestic violence, there's a lot of sense of, where are you going? What are you doing? 10, 30, 50, 150 texts a day asking for whereabouts. Initially, people can often think that this controlling dynamic is romantic. He loves me. He wants to know where I am all the time. And particularly for people who are just coming out of relationships with a partner who wasn't like that, who really was like, you do you, I'll do me, or even a partner who didn't get back to them as quickly as they wanted. A controlling partner initially can, in a very strange, disturbing way, feel like a breath of fresh air. He always wants to know where I am. She always cares what I'm up to. So it feels like interest, but 100 texts a day is not normal. That's often where it begins. It can begin sweetly with a good morning text and where are you doing? Where are you going? What are you up to today? What's up? What's going on? Where are you at now? And where it starts to creep in is when there's anger about the fact that you didn't respond right away. What are you doing? Why haven't you responded? Huh? What's up? I don't understand. And then it starts escalating. Now, some people actually have jobs, teachers, therapists, physicians, the person who fixes your car. Well, they got other stuff to do. And if they are constantly, they simply cannot answer your text. Airplane pilots, I like to think they're not answering the text while they're flying through the sky. In many professions, you can't just keep answering texts every 10 minutes. And that need to know, it can have a very controlling element. Tell me where you are. Now, it starts getting very creepy in the world of technology. Because increasingly, with your phone, you can be tracked and followed. And that's all going to work out real nice for you. If you're lost in a hike in the mountains, you're going to be thrilled that somebody could find you. But in your day-to-day life, this idea that people can always find you is a problem. Listen, I'm a mom, and I do like the idea that with Find Your Phone, I can actually kind of keep tabs on, one of my kids when they were under 18 and sort of find out where they are. But beyond that, do you really want someone to know where you are all the time? And in a controlling relational dynamic, something we often see with narcissists is that they'll sometimes generously offer to buy their partner a phone and put them on their plan. Be very careful there. If your partner is showing any other patterns of narcissism, that generous offer to get your phone and pay for your plan can actually be a way for them to also monitor the sort of find your iPhone setting or some other tracking setting so they always know where you are. In some relationships, the person will even ask the person, hey, put your tracking on, and people will go with that. It can even get darker because it's quite easy to put a tracker on a car. Doesn't take long, can go right under, and if somebody so generously purchases you a car, but keeps the deed in their name, and even if the deed's not, they can put a tracker on a car. And that means at all times, somebody knows where you are. That idea of people knowing where you are at all times, just popping into work at random times to check in on you. These are the kinds of dynamics we see in a controlling relationship, and especially for young people, and strangely, especially for young women, sadly, they often conflate this. He always wants to know where I am, with it being a really intense love story, rather than a really scary, controlling story. Control can happen in other ways too. It can happen in families. Family members can control each other, for example, with money. Parents who have money may attempt to engage in a dynamic of control by controlling them through allowances, family trusts, or other ways of making sure they can puppeteer all the people in the system. Another means of control, and I've seen this happen in more than a few families, especially when the family has some money, there'll be a big family vacation, big family reunion. It's there when they pay for everyone to go, and then those controlling parents can sort of hold court on these expensive vacations. Or it could even be a sibling who decides to organize a family vacation, but since they pay for the bulk of it, they puppeteer and control all the dynamics of the trip. It can feel very unsettling because you'll feel that one way you got a gift, but it's a gift with a lot of strings attached. Other controlling dynamics include, for example, even controlling what you do at work. Did you ask for the right raise? Did you ask for a new assignment on your job? They'll really encroach in places where it's not appropriate, and they'll also attempt to control you by diminishing you, by making you feel like you're less than, your job is less than, you don't get paid enough, you're not worth as much because you don't make as much money, your job title isn't all that. By diminishing you, a person can control you. Money is a very common way for a person to control another person. We see this a lot in relationships, and sadly it is often gendered. In heterosexual relationships, it can quite often happen to a woman. In fact, probably one of the best domestic violence kinds of initiatives we could ever launch is that women have their own independent salaries and don't give those up. Because the minute a person gives up money in a relationship, it can become a very, very uncomfortable space if you have a partner that's controlling. Because narcissists are so insecure, if they can control people in relationships, it gives them a better sense of safety, as it were, in those relationships. So whether it's through money, whether it's through insults, whether it's through isolation, that's a very common dynamic of control. Isolate a person from other voices that are voices of reason. Isolate a person from their family, from their friends, from a workplace, and then their partner is the only one controlling the reality. But all of these become ways for that insecure narcissist to be able to exert control over a partner, like I said, over a family member. There may even be very controlling workplaces where everything is monitored within an inch of its life, and it's not necessary in the profession. For example, it's not sort of a high risk, high security kind of profession where that kind of monitoring may be necessary. Pay attention to this dynamic. In relationships in particular, it can be a very, very dangerous dynamic. Setting up a dynamic of that will keep escalating to the point where the control is exerted through money, it's exerted through threats, it can be exerted through isolation, and before long, a person in an over-controlled relationship like that can become isolated, full of doubt, and not have the resources that they need to get themselves the help that they need. Controlling relational dynamics are something that are often also culturally valued. That in more than a handful of cultures around the world, the idea that a man controls or dominates a partner is not considered unusual. And it's another way a person can, without knowing it, slide into a controlling dynamic in a relationship. And that's often a dynamic that's led by a narcissistic partner. Control is one of the patterns in the 30 days of narcissism we're talking about that can actually get quite dangerous. So please pay attention. And obviously, if this dynamic is escalating to the place of violence, isolation, or that you, or certainly that other people are at risk, definitely work with domestic violence hotlines, law enforcement, or any other advocates which in your region may be able to get you to a place of health and safety.
In any area of mental health, you want to know the science so we can really understand what these topics are about from a data-driven perspective. Now, a couple of months ago, a brilliant scholarly article written by doctors Sophie Kirovic and Brad Bushman from Ohio State University took on the big topic of the association between narcissism and aggression, and they did this in a very comprehensive manner. This paper is one of the best examinations I have ever seen of this issue. The authors looked at the results of 437 existing individual studies as a means of drawing their conclusions. The power of this methodology of looking at many studies is that this is not just the conclusion of one study. This is the cumulative evidence that is piled up across hundreds of studies examining this issue in studies and samples around the world and across different types of population. Now, what Kirovic and Bushman found was that regardless of gender, culture, age, the way the research was designed, and of how aggression was measured, and how narcissism was measured, the findings were absolutely consistent. Narcissism is clearly associated with aggression. Now, some of you may be thinking, okay, you can say that as big as you want, Dr. Ramani. Big surprise, I already knew that. But the fact is, maybe we did suspect that, but in the world of science and of policy, individual stories aren't enough. This study is groundbreaking because the authors were able to show very clearly that this association is universal. This is no longer a speculation. I mean, the scientist in me needs to see the data, and these researchers were able to show it. The real brilliance of this article, though, is that because they looked at so many studies, they could look at these issues of, for example, of aggression and narcissism measured in so many different ways. When they looked at aggression, they framed it in different ways, including physical aggression, verbal aggression, direct expression of aggression, for example, directly aggressing against a victim who is right in front of the aggressor, and indirect aggression, for example, a smear campaign against someone. An important component of aggression that they captured is something called displaced aggression as well. Think of that as being in the presence of someone who is having a rageful episode that you witness, but that rageful episode is not necessarily directed at you. And they also captured under aggression both online and in-person bullying and online trolling or provoking people online. All of these things taken together accurately were captured under their definition of aggression. Now, one thing that was particularly striking to me was that the authors observed comparable associations between grandiose narcissism and aggression and covert/vulnerable narcissism. They found it, and aggression. They found it regardless of the type of narcissism. Another important finding is that narcissism was also associated with something called reactive aggression. Reactive aggression is provocation-based aggression, as well as what they call proactive aggression, which is to aggress against someone without provocation, but instead you do it because of some other incentive, maybe to gain advantage or to dominate someone. And they found a comparably strong association between narcissism and actual violence, meaning that narcissism is a risk factor, as we call it, for dangerous and violent behavior. Interestingly, Dr. Bushman's other research, he was one of the authors on who was one of the authors on this paper, has also done his own prior research suggesting that narcissism is a risk factor for mass shootings, something many of us who do this work on narcissism have suspected for a long time, and he was able to pull together the data and the science on that. There's long been a belief that narcissistic people are hot-headed, meaning that they're aggressive when they feel provoked. Where this study that I'm talking about was so striking is that, yes, that is true. But they also found that the narcissistic personality is associated with aggression even when there is no provocation. So that actually raises the risk level associated with this personality style. Provocation does matter because provocation does in fact increase narcissistic aggression, which holds up a model that other people have brought up of this idea that aggression is an ego-protecting stance in narcissistic people. That's something that's been suggested by other past researchers like Ray Baumeister. But since the research suggests that even in the absence of provocation, there is aggression, ego protection is not the only function that aggression is serving. A really fascinating cultural finding also emerged in their research. Narcissism was associated with violence and aggression, regardless of whether it was conducted in a collectivistic or individualistic culture. Now, the authors were very clear to point out that much less of this research has been conducted in collectivistic cultures, but in those studies that were, they found similar associations. The traditional belief that's often been out there is that this idea of collectivism, that this may be protective against this link between narcissism and aggression, that didn't bear out. And in that way, the association between narcissism and aggression supersedes all the protections of a collectivistic cultural bias. This goes beyond a message that in an individualistic culture where it's every person for themselves, this suggests that there's something embedded within the narcissistic individual, regardless of whether the culture is about the group or the individual. Now, when I read this study again and again, and I've even had the pleasure of corresponding with the authors about it, which was a tremendous honor, what struck me is the danger we have in society when we minimize and when we play down the impacts of this personality style. The tendency that we have of just sort of lightheartedly viewing narcissism as just sort of vain, arrogant, preening, and pretentious, but nothing beyond that. This research suggests, one more brick in that wall, that this is dangerous. There are so many important implications in the findings of this research paper. In the area, for example, of domestic violence, intimate partner violence, family violence, this implies that the unique dangers of narcissism in these spaces, because since the nature of intimate relationships, the closeness, imply that there's going to be a greater likelihood of these so-called provocation episodes, even about small issues, and then a risk of even more violence. In the area of workplace violence, there is the implication in these research findings that narcissism is going to result in more dangerous workplaces. In the area of public safety, for example, Dr. Bushman's work on mass shootings and narcissism suggests the risks that are inherent in that. In our day-to-day lives, that narcissism is actually something that is essential for legal and justice systems to understand, for politicians to understand, for policymakers to understand, for public health officials to understand, and for educators to understand, and above all else, for mental health practitioners and researchers to understand. I have no idea what the hell prevention looks like when it comes to narcissism. Let's face it, narcissism isn't against the law, but it sure is a risk factor for lots of dangerous illegal behavior and dangerous behavior in general. However, there is very little I believe we can do to prevent it, because that would require a wholesale takeover of parenting and early childhood development. Good luck with that. Now, this isn't just about an annoying or gaslighting partner. That's not all that narcissism's about. It's not just about a manipulative parent or a cheating ex. This paper suggests that narcissism is about a real societal danger associated with a personality pattern that society is more often than not likely to enable. We make narcissistic people our leaders, our heroes, and we view their lives as aspirational. We are, in essence, revering the very patterns associated with personalities that make the world a more dangerous place. If ever science was a wake-up call, it's in this article. Now, the full citation for this article, for those of you who are interested in the research, or students or therapists or academics, go pull it, because the reference is there. I can't recommend it enough. It is one of the most important pieces of work I have read in years. Really, congratulations and gratitude to Drs. Kirovic and Bushman for this work. Those of you who are interested in it, really take this article in, because the data, all of it, is some of the most compelling stuff I've read in a while. It always helps when we suspect something in the world of narcissism, when people put in the years of work, and I know this work took them years to do, to really show that the data supports a link here. And the more we have these supportive links through the data, the more that there may someday, probably long after I'm dead and gone, but there may someday be a willingness to see these patterns and understand them. So we might actually be able to help people who find themselves in these situations, help them not only become safer, but possibly create policy that might potentially make this world a safer place. Thanks again.